generative AI kind of made people really uncomfortable because it was like all their competitors who had been putting in the effort over the years in a frankly a very unsexy area of data, right? Anyone who has dealt with data quality, data governance, things like that can attest to the fact that like a lot of times their efforts are not seen as valuable within the company. But it's kind of like it's like planting the seeds to eventually sort of like be able to cultivate the crop, right?
Welcome back to the Data Bytes Podcast, everyone. I have a fantastic guest here today. Mickey is an MLOps and AI engineer at Labelbox, and she has had, I want to say, almost every data role within the data industry. Everything from being an analyst, data scientist, senior analyst, software engineer, lead of developer relations. So we are going to dive into all things data, all things MLOps. And Mickey, welcome to the show. So excited to have you.
Hello. Hey, everyone. It's finally great to chat one on one because we bumped into each other at conferences, but we haven't really had like the space to like have a one on one conversation. So I'm excited.
Yeah, same here. I get to meet so many great people at conferences and I'm like, oh, I got to have them on the pod. And then we just ran into each other from the MLOps community event. I think was that in June in San Francisco? I think it was. So, yeah, which is another great community. I highly recommend that everybody go check that out. I know they have another event coming up here in September, and that's going to be virtual, so it's a great opportunity for people to jump in. But yes, just as you mentioned, at conferences, it's so hard to be able to like really talk to people. You're making like, oh my god, it's great to see you, and what's going on, but like to really get and be like, what you working on, and what's your story. So thank you for taking the time to come in and talk to us today. So I want to start off actually a little bit with your story because your background is one of the reasons why I love working in data is there's so many different roles that you can do in this space. And like I said in the beginning, you've touched on so many from being a data scientist to an analyst and software engineer and then even going on more on the I want to say marketing side with the relationships and developer relations. How do you continue to make these transitions in the data industry? And what's the pivot point for you? Like, when's that aha moment of like, okay, I want to move from a data scientist to a senior analyst or whatever that may be?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's a little bit of a personality quirk because I get bored very, very easily. And even the data science career was a little bit accidental because when I went to college, there wasn't a lot of so first off, a lot of the AI jobs didn't exist at that time, definitely not in the form they exist now. When I went off to college, I was trying to go down the tried and true path of like doctor, lawyer, engineers, like what I call the holy trinity of like jobs, right? For parents, right? The ones where I guess also maybe finance, like quant trader, whatever, right? So I went to school to do the pre-med program in biomedical engineering there. Just things did not kind of work out. And I think that's sort of been really a big theme about my career is trying to unlearn a lot of that early career advice that was not really helpful to then find out what did I actually want to do, right? And so one of the pieces of advice that was given to me very early on was, it's not that it's bad advice, the idea of do what you love, but I think when you're early in your career, it's actually better advice is to pick up useful skills and then to really kind of leverage them in order to get more opportunities to either figure out what you like doing or to do more of what you like. So, I went to school for to become a doctor, realized it wasn't really aligned with what I found interesting in college, which was anthropology and economics. I really enjoyed how people like think and also how they sort of behave in groups. What are the cultural traditions and norms that they create? Um, and how does that kind of influence their psychology and how they think and how they reason and make decisions? So I come out of college and I don't really have a lot of marketable skills, because my focus was a lot more on a liberal arts education in that regard. So I had to very quickly pick up skills. Now, the thing that I think benefited me was, I was born and raised in San Francisco. My parents moved out there during or before the dot com bust. So when I graduated UC San Diego, I was able to move back to San Francisco, live with my parents for about a year or two while I just kind of figured out, okay, what's my next steps? And just with how much of a tech hub it is, that meant I could go early on, like work for startups, try different jobs in growth hacking, data analytics, and then eventually kind of like leveraging that to go into data science and like MLOps, But really, like at each point, it was I learned enough about what I was doing that I just really quickly got bored and was like, okay, so what's like the next problem I need to like solve in the what I tell people is like the data machine learning like value chain, and then eventually kind of made my way up to MLOps engineering, where it's just like you're helping to enable data scientists and developers to innovate, which I really enjoy. I enjoy kind of rather than so I, and this is an interview question I actually used when I was on the hiring committee at MailChimp was, would you prefer to be like a full stack data scientist where you're going 0 to 1, or do you prefer to be more in the platform infrastructure side where you're building tooling that like enables 50 like models or projects? And that's where like I really enjoy being for sure.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned regarding like learn useful skills because, I think that's such great advice. Yes, you want to follow your passion and follow your bliss and everything, but you have to have some useful skills in a way to follow your passion and bliss. And that's just something that I don't think really gets talked about a lot, especially like early on in your career. And it seems like you were able to find a lot of those interesting areas because you worked in a lot of startups in on your resume, which is I feel like one of the best place to like put your hands in all the different pots and explore everything. What attracts you to startups, and what do you think is the mindset that you need to have if you're someone who is maybe interested in working for startups or kind of looking at startups as an option for your career?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really important is there's this concept of like learn and earn. Ideally, both is great if you're learning and earning, but if you can't get both, you should at least get like one of those. For the most part, I have not seen like working for startups, especially early stage ones, to be like a lucrative decision. For most people, if they're much more interested in the monetary aspects, they would be better off leak coding into like a FANG job. When you go work for a startup, you and it's this is always an interesting conversation with recruiters, right? Because it is a risk, right? So I do have 4 early stage startups. Part of also being successful is knowing when to bail out of a startup. um, so of the 4 plus early stage or mid-sized startups I've worked for, a majority of them, well, half of them have failed, and the other half they've gone on to do reasonably well, but they haven't done so well to where staying was like a better option. So it is a risk. But it's an informed risk, and I don't think we really talk about that enough when it comes to like career counseling and advising people in AI and machine learning. Is that not all risk is the same. So when you go work for a startup, as long as they're essentially able to meet your kind of basic salary, and you're not working for like sweat equity or like $0, it's there's no real downside because you spend a year or two working for a startup. You learn a lot. A lot of times you get more responsibility and scope than you would, for example, if you're a junior engineer working in an established company that has an engineering hierarchy. One of the challenges there is your career might not grow as fast. You do have to navigate like a certain level of politics. You do have to sort of check off the boxes in a non-startup environment. It's very sort of structured and rigorous. And there were times in my life where I really kind of needed that. I needed more stability, support, structure in my work. But there were times, and these were usually the times when I would go move to a startup. is where I wanted more autonomy. I wanted more challenge. I wanted more growth opportunities. I wanted to get my hands on projects that I know if I had stayed in an established engineering org, it probably would have taken me like 2, 3 years to go up go up the ladder, right? And that's something that like when I was like in various kind of points of my career, I've both like mentored at data science machine learning boot camps, and I've also like been on like hiring committees for engineering and data science and machine learning. We would have candidates that came in where I think almost like too early on they joined like a kind of a not necessarily a FANG company, but either FANG or they, joined a company. They stayed there for like, let's say 6 to 8 years. And maybe they didn't bother like keeping up with their skill set outside of that. So when we would interview them for like a system design interview or a tech screen or something like that, we'd say like, hey, how would you go about designing like a machine learning platform or a data processing platform or things like this, right? They would just kind of regurgitate what they were familiar with, which is like a really custom in-house platform that maybe Facebook has or that some other company had. And then they couldn't like really generalize their knowledge to designing something from scratch or to like to a new engineering environment or setup, right? So there's kind of risk and reward there. It's you go to an early stage startup, it is risky in the sense that you could probably make more in like a bigger company, but you learn so much more, and that learning then helps you kind of hopscotch usually into a more senior, better paying role with a more like stable established company if you then choose to do that route.
Is there a not a right time or a wrong time to join a startup, but maybe a better time or a worse time, right? Would you recommend it's better like early on out of college, out of your career? Or is it better to like join maybe a corporate company, get some of that foundational experience before you go into a startup? What again, there's no right or wrong answers. I don't believe in that. But is there a maybe a better time in your opinion?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to like advice that a mentor, like I have a lifelong mentor. He was actually my high school fencing coach. And I've kept up with him over the years and all that, and he's just been very influential, especially in my early years of navigating a career in tech. And he gave me some advice that I thought was just like so good. And the advice be risky with your career and conservative with your money, and not risky with your money and conservative with your career. Um, that was something that, you know, like when he kind of gave me that advice, and especially like I didn't come from like an affluential family, right? So my family is like kind of a mix of, my mom immigrated to the States, and so on and so forth. So it resonated because that is something that I think you don't actually observe. It's not something you see in your 20s, but it's something you see in your 30s, that the people who didn't really like take a lot of risk and they didn't sort of challenge themselves early on, um, they start getting really nervous about like, okay, how are we going to pay for a wedding? How are we going to pay for a house? How are we going to do XYZ? So I personally feel like if you're a young person, if you're a young thing and you're like 20s, that's a beautiful time to join a startup. I wouldn't even worry about like compensation just as long as you're not being taken advantage of. Um, but that's like a beautiful time because then like every experience is like new. And more importantly, a lot of times startups, they are hiring for a minimum viable like skill set. But you can, if you have a good story as a young engineer or as a young data scientist or whatever, and you kind of like show effort and initiative to learn outside, that'll get you a lot farther in interviewing for startups than, for example, trying to compete for a spot in an established company. And I've seen tons of people like, and there's a lot of folks that we know mutually where, early on in their career, it's like they didn't work at a FANG company like early on. Maybe they have like different jobs here and there. Maybe they did consulting. Maybe did they worked as a contractor. Maybe they were doing content creation on the side, but then when they get to like their 30s or whatever, like their career just explodes because they were laying all the foundation for having this like amazing career in life that they've built and curated for themselves by taking all that action like early on. You know, when there was like much less risk. When you're older, it's like you have kids, you have a mortgage, you have XYZ. That's probably not the time to go quit your job and then to go try doing a startup. And also working as startup early on means you have more information and data to increase the success like probability that you'll actually like if you want to go build something, you'll be able to do that successfully.
Yeah, I think that's very solid advice. And, I'm definitely that one of those people in the latter bucket who in the 20s was kind of boring person. And then they're just like, oh, all the success came. It's like, yeah, because you didn't see what I was doing in my 20s. I was doing all the boring things. Right. And so that's what you can, take that risk, be boring in your 20s. That's definitely the time. Today you work at Labelbox. Tell us a little bit more about what Labelbox is all about and, what does it there's no such thing as a similar day to day, but what does a day to day look like if you had to define one as an MLOps and AI engineer at Labelbox?
Yeah, totally. So, Lailbox is we call ourselves the data engine or the data factory for generative AI. Why do we say that? So initially Lailbox started, I think, more than 6 years ago as a labeling and annotation platform for like computer vision, for natural language, things like this, right? And this is pre generative AI when deep learning was really kind of taking off, and this was like a problem where a lot of companies like they didn't have like labeled unstructured data, right? So they'd use Labelbox's annotate and catalog tool to hand and manual label all like thousands of images, draw the bounding boxes, add the labels to text, things like that, and then get it stored so that so the machine learning engineers and data scientists could use it downstream to train or fine tune models. Now that's kind of Labelbox has expanded outside of just being a tooling platform to also offer human labeling services through like the aligner arm is what the aligner company, it's the arm of the services, and also expanding on the existing tooling platform to also include things, for example, like auto labeling, to include we have a Foundry product which allows you to also fine tune models for like additional labeling. All this is in the for the ultimate aim of helping companies, whether they're like enterprises or startups, to improve the data quality that then allows their models to be state of the art. So that's what Labelbox does. In terms of day to day, it definitely does change, but a mandate for my mandate is number one, understand what are the pain points that are being experienced by all these like AI innovators and disruptors, especially around how they can continue producing like the most cutting edge foundation models. Um, and part of understanding that pain point is really like understanding their data needs. So, part of what I do, for example, is I keep an eye out on not just like the models that are coming out and how they're performing on the leaderboards, but reading the research papers, really understanding like, what were they doing to improve their data quality situation, to improve their data flywheel, and how can we take those learnings to not only further like innovation in foundation models, but also help, for example, like AI disruptors, small companies who maybe they're doing a more task specific foundation model. How can we help them improve their efforts as well? I'll produce like developer education, as well as listening to a lot of calls and meetings on what's going on with use cases, like really understanding the use cases for generative AI, and also for how people are building foundation models.
Couple things to dive into there. One is just on the data quality side and improving that. I was a little bit sad in our industry Gen AI comes out and hits the market, and so many companies, their data's still not in a good place to really like take advantage of it and utilize it. So hopefully this is reinvigorating people of like, okay, yeah, we actually need to put the time and effort into that. What are you seeing from the side of just like data quality improvements? What's kind of cutting edge for companies, and how are they getting that flywheel effect that you mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think generative AI kind of made people really uncomfortable because it was like all their competitors who had been putting in the effort over the years in a frankly a very unsexy area of data, right? Anyone who has dealt with data quality, data governance, things like that can attest to the fact that like a lot of times their efforts are not seen as valuable within the company. But it's kind of like it's like planting the seeds to eventually sort of like be able to cultivate the crop, right? In terms of like what we're seeing people like what are we seeing our customers and users doing? So there's kind of like there's three core components of data quality. The first part is pre-training, right? So granted there's a lot less companies doing the development of foundation models versus companies that are like using foundation models. But for companies that are training foundation models, like having really good pre-training data is super important. And what do we mean by quality? This is a little bit less obvious in generative AI, but for example, in computer vision, right? A very easy way to mess up your computer vision models was to have inconsistent standards, making sure the images like weren't in the same format. A challenge right now, actually, that people are having with vision models when it comes to data is we're so used to like high resolution images and videos. So the reason why a lot of those images and videos kind of looked a little bit whack when they first came out was that most of the images and video out there was lower resolution than what we're used to seeing now, right? So there's been a lot of work there to actually sort of how do you kind of use low resolution data and what can you do to make it like more high resolution? But especially in images and video. There's a lot of text data, but with images and videos, there's a lot less good quality images, especially if you're dealing with like an industrial use case like defect detection. A lot of the computer vision models out of the box, they don't do super well without extensive fine tuning on, for example, images of cancer cells or, for example, cracks in like industrial piping. So their like data quality is super important. Another area is in like what we call like the post training phase. So not just fine tuning models, but models that are being used in like agents that are customer facing, or even yeah, that's like a big one. That's actually a big one that's coming up where it's like people first were exposed to bad quality issues through chatbots. You had chatbots that would swear at people. You had chatbots that would promise discounts that didn't exist. You had cars that could be bought for $1. Um, but we can kind of think of chatbots as a more like the problems they have is a more general problem that's going to face like any kind of agentic workflow of as long as you have an LLM like at the heart of anything, whether it's an agentic workflow or it's like a text to image model, you need to have like high quality instruction data and also human preference data to actually make it more palatable to like human users.
Yeah, when we think about it, it really wasn't that long ago that Microsoft, was it Tay, came out and quickly got shut down from the internet, right? So we've made a lot of progress with our chat features and what we can do with them. You mentioned also one of the things though that you work on is just reading a lot of papers, listening to calls in terms of what are the true use cases for Gen AI. Everybody hears about customer service. I think that one gets talked about a lot. But what are some of the new use cases that you're seeing come out for Gen AI that you find really interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk about the category that I think is super interesting, and that is like multimodal use cases. So there's a couple. So what do we mean by multimodal? So people are kind of like they're used to they have some understanding of, for example, like text to image. That is a subset of like multimodal models. Multimodal models are really kind of the first stage to creating models or systems that start approaching like how we humans interact in the world, right? We don't just see things through like text or through like images, but audio, geospace, like there's all these sort of data modalities that aren't currently being addressed except by a very like small segment of models. And when we think about, for example, there's a ton of situations where you want like multiple data inputs in order to get to like a good outcome, right? So, for example, in like healthcare diagnoses, a lot of times you can't just like look at a patient and you can't just kind of look at like their health diagnostics to say, okay, for example, they're healthy or unhealthy, or they have this and not that. And a lot of times too, for example, you don't want to like find out they have cancer necessarily when they're at stage 4. Ideally, you'd like to identify it at stage 1 or stage 2. And so what if, for example, we were able to actually incorporate all these different modalities to like create a much richer like healthcare experience? I think that's a really, really exciting area. I think another area that to me is like super exciting is so when my partner and I got engaged in March. So we went to India to get engaged, and as part of that engagement sort of experience, my like future in-laws took us to a tiger reserve, and we spent some days there, and we found out that there's this kind of huge project that happens, or this huge initiative that happens in India called the Tiger Census Project. Occurs every 4 years, and their goal is to try to count and identify all the unique individuals of tigers throughout India to like make sure their conservation efforts are paying off. So to me, that was like another really kind of like hearing about that was a really really cool use case because like what they do is they'll take they have like 10,000 cameras all throughout the parks that they have to then like reconcile all the footage. They take photos of like paw prints. They take samples. They have social media data that they have to incorporate to then like identify like, you know, is this tiger like tiger A? Is this tiger like 1, 2, 3? To then like identify where they should invest their conservation efforts. And for example, in that case, like India is home to I think they said like 70% of the tiger population of the world remaining. So those efforts or use cases to me are super exciting, and of course the ones that typically come up are autonomous driving, anything like robotics, anything personal devices. So all those things are really interesting sort of use cases for generative AI, and specifically like multimodal.
You also mentioned agents, and I think we're all eagerly waiting for agents in some regard and can see it coming too. Every application I use, there's some chat feature within it of Gen AI enabled. And so I start to just go, okay, when can now these applications start to talk to each other? Like when is my Adobe going to start talking to my Monday board, etc.? What are you seeing on the agent side? Are there any great people who are actually implementing agents successfully out there? And if not, kind of what's that barrier for entry for agents?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few platforms where or frameworks or tooling companies that are trying to like democratize access to like building agents, right? So Crew AI, Relevance, those guys, like they're all trying to like create tooling to like make it easier to create agents. I think, and there's like a few papers I've seen. So, for example, Comcast had produced a paper on developing and implementing agents in their support center. There's a few others. I think agents work out when you have a very clean, specific use case. And I think actually that's going to be the challenge in terms of scaling agents because the the wider in scope you make your agent, the harder it actually becomes to add guardrails and to make sure you're like properly evaluating it. So I think like I think most of the tech like the big tech companies I've seen, they figured out ways to deploy agents in like, so for example, Meta has like shown that they've created agents for creating avatars, for like agents and or product features that support their push to like the meta universe, or the metaverse. I've seen like Notion like produce some stuff. I think in the beginning, a lot of people were rushing towards creating just like a general agent that could do anything. But now I think they've kind of like learned some of those lessons of what happens when you have an unscoped agent and you just kind of push it out there. And instead, they're looking at like what are kind of like very specific use cases for how we can like help accelerate a person's like workflow. So I think that's like kind of right now, that's what I'm seeing is people focusing on like very, very narrow use cases and then figuring out how can they then connect those multiple agents to be a little bit more expansive from there.
Yeah, it seems like we're in a similar place to how we are with like data governance and data quality. It's like if you don't have your data quality, it's going to be hard to build a lot of these models. But on the agent side and business side, like if you don't have good business processes or even know what your business process is, it's going to be hard to implement an agent and put it out there in the wild because, as you mentioned, we're really narrowing in on the use cases. So like, would you recommend for organizations today, if they are looking at adding in more agents, that they start with really standardizing some of their processes and standardizing how they do things so that they're prepared? Or what can people do to take action and prepare for what's coming next?
Yeah, and so this is the tricky part of on the one so the aspirational advice I could give people is like yeah, like do all the hard work of ground up improving data quality, layering in data governance and things like that to eventually get to a state where you can more kind of easily build like a POC. But what I found actually to be much more successful is if you build and launch a small like POC and you kind of show that there is demand for that on the product side, that a lot of times then it becomes easier to justify investments into improving like data quality. I've seen this too, just not just with our users and customers, but like internally with growth and product teams that I've worked on, where they want to do something like they want to clean up the product analytics tables, or they want to get Salesforce like kind of cleaned back up, but they can't really do that until they've shown one, there's like a severe potential like miss on the revenue targets because like the data quality isn't there, or maybe what they do is like they do an alpha an alpha POC where they're like, okay, we want to let me like just kind of do a quick use case of like a lot of people I try doing a general Q&A bot on their knowledge base. But maybe what they could have done is they could have identified like a specific step in their onboarding process for new users and instead gone, okay, like what can we do to like bring up articles or resources that we think they're going to need more immediately, right? So that is actually kind of a better way to go about it, because also the other thing too that I think teams run into is sometimes you just have too many cooks in the kitchen and you just kind of want to like isolate it to like a small skunkworks team that can kind of get something done, and you want to have it a small enough POC where legal is not like concerned, the data team is not concerned, and maybe what you do is you, for example, do an internal launch among employees, or you do like a small external launch to like a customer segment uh, that isn't really like an expensive segment to like upset, right? And then you collect that data and then you bring it in and then you like improve on that. I think that's the thing that like a lot of companies struggle with is the continuous iterative improvement. I think if they can get that motion going instead of just trying to assume that every model they push, like treating it as a silver bullet, then I think more companies can be successful with these like generative AI POCs and also using that to then justify like investments in data quality.
Yeah, I think I love that you tied in the you have to justify your investment too. Like, there, I think that's one of the reasons that data quality has suffered so much is it can be trickier to show like, hey, we're spending all this time and these hours and investment in tools, and like it's a longer term down the line actual business outcome on your P&L. And so I love that advice of like, keep the team small, get it really narrowly focused, and iterate. Like that is the key, so you can show that incremental value, which I think is just kind of golden standard advice, but we all need to hear it over and over again because it's so quickly we all forget and are like, let's boil the ocean, let's do it all, let's make this big thing, when it's like, no, let's narrow focus and just improve a little bit every day.
Yeah, totally. I mean, once again, it's like I early in my career, I would have, I definitely would have tried to like, do the right thing, and like that's the hill that I die on. Is like we have to do the right thing. We have to do it like gradually. But that's just not how businesses work. That's definitely not how most tech companies work. And like what better way to show something is valuable than to have some initial data around, for example, if like 85% of people who like experience the feature or the agent are then taking that like action that you want it to take. And companies should know, like developers, if you're developing an agent, you should know what is the ideal outcome you want out of this. Then that's like a very strong like vote, right? For the, okay, now we need to kind of, improve the quality and make sure like our agent is, I don't know, like less verbose, or it's speaking in the brand's personality, or things like that.
100%. I mean, it's one of those things that I want to shout from the rooftops of reminding people. And what's funny is we as data people, right? We build the models, whether you're in data quality, data engineering, ML ops. We so often forget to measure and share the data of what we're doing, right? And it's like, okay, we all need that simple reminder too of like, yes, data person, get data on yourself and your projects and share that data about what you're doing too. So I think that's a great reminder for all of us. When we think about kind of the future of where all of this is headed, what gets you most excited about the future of AI, and what gets you most concerned?
Yeah, so what gets me excited and concerned? I think I can kind of start. I'll start with like what gets me concerned. Is I don't think the generative AI is going to take our jobs rhetoric is like very useful, and I definitely don't think companies should be making layoff decisions based off of that. Um, I don't know. Like there's like this weird period, what, like 6 months ago, where like everyone and their mother was like laying, like just laying employees off in mass, right? And it was hard to read that. Like, so for example, some of these people had already experienced like 3 layoffs in 2 years. I don't think that's a very responsible way to make decisions. And this is probably also why I'm never going to be CEO. I might be a business owner, right? Like I might start a business and own it, but I don't think I could be a tech CEO because it just, I know that left a bad taste in my mouth. So I get really concerned about people kind of pushing rhetoric and like hype that then leads to some of these decisions that are sometimes not these actions that are not done in a very respectful manner, right? The other part where I do get concerned is I think it is kind of becoming a battle of haves versus have-nots, i.e., a lot of the people get that can afford to compete in the space is it's like slowly becoming actually just the big companies once again, right? It's always like awesome when you hear of like organizations and companies like Mistral and Cohere, Anthropic. They're and other like companies when that like kind of stage where they're not like the big cloud providers, and they're fighting the good fight, right? And you're seeing open source models are approaching the performance of proprietary models, but I get concerned about how it seems like it's just there's a little bit of inequality going on in terms of who has access to resources to train foundation models and who are the people that are ultimately being able to sell them. So it's really wonderful that Meta had actually open sourced Llama 3 and a bunch of these models with very kind of permissive um, requirements. Now, things I'm kind of excited about is I do think in many ways it is easier than ever to get into AI and to build really kind of cool stuff. So in some ways, I try not to, like, part of my job is to understand the trends and to understand how that impacts us as a company. But I also do try to spend part of my time not seeing the trends and not spending time on social media, instead focusing on my own like personal projects. And I think that's where I find the most fulfillment and where I find the most excitement is, for example, the fact that you can like train small models, small foundation models, you can build on top of them. Typically, you had to have like an experience as a data scientist or as an MLE to build cool stuff, but now you can actually just go straight to building a POC. And then if you want to expand on the data side, if you want to make algorithmic improvements, you can go do that, but you don't have to spend all this money and time to get something going. So I think that is really awesome. I'm really excited to see that. I think the other area I'm really excited about too is I think a lot of the hype would kind of make people think that generative AI is the only AI that's out there, but that's actually not true. Like computer vision and, well, maybe traditional NLP has taken a hit, but computer vision is still going strong, and there are a lot of use cases for non-generative AI as well. There's a lot of like new models that are being released. For example, SAM2 was released recently for better segmentation. So there's more powerful tools that people can use to build stuff. So I'm very excited for that, like that realm of opportunity and possibility for individual developers to like, go build something, ship it, and then to maybe even like scale them out into like startups or businesses.
Yeah, you and I had the same thought just like 2 days ago. I was on a walk and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's so much easier to like, in a way, build and use models than it was like even 3 years ago, where it reminds me to what it happened when like the cloud really came out and what that did for like software engineering is like when you didn't have to set up your own infrastructure and could just like go on to AWS or GCP and, you know, unfortunately for me, buy a lot of different things and then forget to turn them off when I first started using it. Right? And go, oh wait, why do I have a bill of this much next month? But it was so enabling, right? You didn't have to actually build your own rack, and so it enables you to do so much more. The same is now in the world of data science and AI. Like you can go and use like state of the art models with what Meta's come out with Llama 3.1. It's really incredible of what we can do now. And I agree with you as well. Like just the accessibility of it is super exciting, and it just makes me excited for what people are going to build and what people are going to create. And I'm always happy to see open source once again, leading the way and soon taking over. And because it really does come down from that collective of the community. So I know you're massive in community wherever I go in ML and ops, you are there and such a kind of voice and beacon of light in the community. As we get close to wrapping up today, what advice do you have for people on how to cultivate their own community and even just build community for themselves?
So here, I mean, I think so. Three things that people definitely shouldn't do. These are mistakes I made. So the first one is kind of feeling like you have to be an expert. Um, Oddly enough, I've kind of had these like ups and downs with my own sort of content creation journey because and this would happen sometimes too, where like for example, a I'm working with a client or whatever, and they're like, yeah, we promote our thing or be quote unquote the expert, and I kind of feel like I personally do better when I'm like a learner student that's really and just offering kind of helpful advice. So I definitely don't think someone has to be an expert or like the top of the field to provide value in such a way that you build a community around you. I think the second thing that like people should not do if they're trying to build a community is don't immediately try to monetize or sell your skills or feel like you have to. I think the best communities are built around authenticity. And for me, and this is something like I've had to kind of learn the hard way multiple times, is I do my best work when I feel like I can 100% own my opinions. the minute I feel like I'm a talk box for someone else, it just no longer comes off authentic, and I really just like struggle to be active and be a participant anymore. And I think the third thing that people shouldn't do is that they shouldn't do what other people are doing just because those people are successful. So, for example, I consider doing like creating YouTube videos. Um, I've improved my speaking skills over the years. I used to have a massive stutter and I would just get massive anxiety attacks, like speaking on a stage or speaking at workshops, doing seminars. I don't necessarily have that anymore, but it's still not my strong suit. And rather than trying to keep kind of pushing with my weakness, instead I've had to go, okay, like just honestly with myself, like what am I strong at and what kind of gives me joy? And what gives me joy is like doing like long form writing, building my own little projects, sharing when I feel like sharing. And it's okay to not try to like immediately create it into a business or into a side hustle. I think we do have a little bit of a hustle grind culture in Silicon Valley. And I think sometimes people think like, oh, I have to do that to be successful. And it's like, no, what you need to do to be successful is to do stuff, run with the stuff you like doing, and create opportunities for yourself through that. But just like know thyself and just don't do what everyone else is doing just because like it seems like the right thing to do. Just like kind of really be honest with yourself about like what gives you joy, and the things that give you joy, what like provides value. So that's what I would say to anyone who's trying to create community, trying to create a personal brand, especially given how important a personal brand is to finding your way in like AI and ML.
I think that is beautiful advice and also a great way to wrap up today. And it just tons of great advice that you have given us just from starting in your career and what to look for, all the way from how to build some of these models and some of the use cases. So, Mickey, thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with us and share all of your experience, share all of your wisdom with us. This has been really, really helpful. And I just want to say thank you for everything you're doing in the community.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for having me. And once again, like looking forward to like all the future podcasts and episodes with your guests. I love listening in. So
Awesome. And a big thank you to our listeners. Remember to stay curious and keep learning, and we will catch you next time on the Data Bytes podcast. Bye, everybody. If you are enjoying the conversations you are hearing today, we encourage you to continue to be a part of the conversation and join a community of like-minded, extraordinary women. With our free community membership, you're stepping into a realm where learning, networking, and growth are at the heart and soul of what we do. Connect with Women in Data's global community and network with our chapters all for free. But why stop there? Upgrade your membership with a special offer for Data Bytes listeners by getting $20 off a pro membership, in which you'll receive access to over 300 classes, leadership training, and exclusive events. If you're interested in mentorship and networking, we've got you. From monthly thought leadership webinars to exclusive networking events and a diverse on-demand mentorship program, the connections you'll make here are boundless. Join us and be part of a vibrant network. Dive into our book clubs, growth groups, and industry-focused gatherings. Women in Data is not just a community. It's a movement, a place where innovators, changemakers, and leaders come together to shape the future. Visit womenindata.org to join or use the special discount code in the show notes. Together, let's drive change one data byte at a time.